My parents confess that my boyfriend is my cousin when he proposes to me in front of the entire family, falsifying DNA test results along the way to prevent me from discovering that I'm adopted. To give you an idea, this happened about 3 weeks ago, but I'm only now sitting down to write about it because it's too much for me to handle alone. You already know my situation from the title, so you'll understand it's not simple at all. I'm 26 years old and have been with my boyfriend Barry for over 8 years. We met in college when I was 18, so it's not exactly a new relationship. We started dating almost immediately, and while comparing an adult relationship to a high school one isn't ideal, it's been the best I've ever had. Barry became part of my family very quickly. My parents adored him, which always seemed sweet to me, but now that you know the truth, you can't help but think how sick it was. Growing up, I always felt a bit different from my parents, like there was something that made me look distinct. I'm naturally athletic and tall, while my parents are rather short and quite sedentary. I have dark hair and eyes, while both of them are blonde with blue eyes. My mom always said my features came from my dad's grandmother, whom I never met because she died before I was born. I never questioned it because who would? They were my parents, the people I'd known since birth. I couldn't suspect anything. When I was 22, those Ancestry DNA tests became very popular, and I thought it would be fun to do one. I was curious about our family history, especially since my parents were always pretty vague about our extended family. When I told my parents I wanted to take the test, they seemed nervous but said it was fine. A few weeks later, the results came back showing I was 100% genetically related to both of them, which seemed to relieve them. Meanwhile, Barry and I got more serious over the years. We moved in together after college, and about 2 years ago, we started seriously talking about marriage. We both wanted the same things in life, a family and all that. Barry comes from a smaller family than mine. His parents died in a car accident when he was 16, and he was raised by his Aunt Sarah, who lives about 3 hours from us. 3 weeks ago, Barry planned this elaborate proposal at my family's annual summer barbecue. My parents host this big gathering every year with extended family, neighbors, and close friends. It's always been one of my favorite traditions. Barry had been acting nervous all week, and I suspected something was up when he insisted we arrive early to help with preparations. The barbecue was going perfectly, the weather was beautiful, everyone was having a great time, and Barry seemed to get more nervous as the day went on. At sunset, when most of the guests were gathered in the backyard, Barry suddenly got down on one knee in front of everyone. I was so surprised and happy that I barely heard most of what he said, but I remember he talked about how much he loved me and how he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. Just as I was about to say yes, I noticed my parents looked absolutely horrified. Not surprised or excited in a good way, but genuinely terrified. My mom had gone completely pale. My dad was staring at Barry with an expression I'd never seen on him before. And before I could respond to Barry's proposal, my mom suddenly screamed, loud enough that everyone went silent. What happened next was the most surreal and devastating moment of my life. My mom started crying and saying, "We have to tell them now," over and over. My dad was trying to calm her, but she was having what looked like a panic attack. All our guests were staring, and Barry was still on his knee, confused and worried. My dad finally helped my mom inside, and after a few awkward minutes, people started leaving. Barry and I followed my parents into the house, where my mom was sitting at the kitchen table sobbing, and that's when my dad told us the truth. And honestly, I still can't believe it's real. I'm adopted. I have been since I was 3 months old. My biological parents were my dad's cousin and his wife. They died in a house fire when I was a baby, and my parents took me in. But here's the part that makes me want to vomit. Barry is my biological cousin. His Aunt Sarah, who raised him, is actually the sister of my biological mother. My parents knew this from the first day I brought Barry home 8 years ago, but never said anything because they thought we'd eventually break up. The DNA test results I got 4 years ago were completely fake. My parents sent their own DNA samples instead of mine and somehow manipulated the results to show I was their biological daughter. I still don't fully understand how they pulled it off, but apparently my dad has a friend who works in a lab who helped them. Barry and I are cousins. We share grandparents. We've been in love for 8 years, living together, planning a future, and we're blood relatives. The worst part is that everyone in my family knew except us. My uncles, aunts, and even some family friends knew the truth about my adoption and about Barry's real relation to me. They all watched us fall in love and said nothing. After my parents finished explaining everything, Barry and I sat in complete shock. We didn't know what to say to each other or how to process what we just learned. Barry's Aunt Sarah apparently found out about our relationship years ago when Barry mentioned my last name but assumed my parents would tell us the truth. She'd been waiting for them to say something all this time. My entire identity has been a lie. I know nothing about my real parents or my actual family history. I don't know what genetic conditions might run in my family or what my true ethnic background is. I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. Barry has been staying with a friend since that day. We've exchanged a few messages, but we haven't really talked about what this means for our relationship. I think we're both too overwhelmed to have that conversation yet. Part of me still loves him exactly the same as before I found out, which makes me feel guilty and confused. Another part of me feels like our entire relationship is ruined by this information. I'm also furious with my parents and everyone else who knew the truth. They watched me plan a life with someone they knew was my cousin and said nothing. They let me take a fake DNA test and live with false information about my own identity for years. I understand they probably thought they were protecting me, but their deception has caused far more damage than the truth ever could have. I've been staying with my best friend since the barbecue because I can't stand being in the same house as my parents right now. They keep calling and texting, trying to explain their reasons, begging me to come home so we can talk. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. I keep thinking about all the times over the years when my parents seemed uncomfortable when Barry and I talked about getting married and having kids. I remember my mom making weird comments about making sure we were really compatible before making big commitments. I thought she was just being an overprotective mom, but now I realize she was probably trying to hint at the truth without actually saying it. But I can't get past the deception and the feeling that our relationship was built on a lie, even though we didn't know it was a lie. I also can't stop thinking about how our families just watched this happen for 8 years. Every family gathering, every party, every time Barry and I talked about our future, they all knew something we didn't. They saw us the whole time and just sat back and watched. I'm supposed to start grad school in the fall, and I don't know if I can handle that on top of everything else going on. I had planned to study genetics, which now feels like some kind of cosmic joke. I've been thinking about deferring for a year while I get my life in order, but I also don't want the situation to derail my career plans. Am I crazy for still having feelings for Barry? Are my parents unforgivable for lying to me for so long? Should I try to have a relationship with my extended biological family now that I know the truth? Honestly, I'm tremendously lost after this bomb just exploded in my face. Update 1. I know my post has been wild, but if it was wild for you, imagine what it's like for me to be living it. And the worst part is it's not over yet, and I don't think it will be anytime soon. First, I finally had a proper talk with Barry. We met near our apartment for a conversation we both deserved. And we had a long, very long conversation about everything. It was incredibly difficult, but we both knew we needed to address it sooner rather than later. Barry has been doing his own research and soul-searching since finding out. He told me his first instinct was the same as mine. This is really hard, even though we didn't know we were related when we fell in love. But he also said his feelings for me haven't changed, and he's dealing with the same guilt I am about that. We talked about the legal and social aspects of cousin relationships. It's legal in our state, and while it's not exactly common, it's not unheard of either. Barry pointed out that we didn't grow up together as family, so we don't have the typical psychological barriers that exist between relatives raised as siblings or cousins. The conversation was emotional and confusing. We both admitted we still love each other, but there's a big pink elephant in the room we can't ignore. While there are arguments in favor of the relationship, there are some very big ones we can't overlook. We decided to keep living separately for now while we figure it out. Barry will stay with his friend for a few more weeks, and I'll keep staying in our apartment. I also finally had a conversation with my parents. I went back to the house when I knew they'd both be there, and we sat in the living room where I've had so many important conversations over the years. It was strange being back there knowing what I know now. My parents were clearly devastated by how everything unfolded. My mom has barely eaten or slept since the barbecue. They apologized repeatedly and tried to explain their reasons for keeping the truth hidden. According to them, when they took me in as a baby, they decided to raise me as their biological daughter because they thought it would be easier for me. They said in the 90s there was still some stigma around adoption, and they wanted to protect me from having to deal with questions or feeling different from other kids. When I grew up and started dating Barry, they recognized his last name and realized who he was almost immediately. They said they kept hoping our relationship would run its course naturally, especially since we were so young when we started. They never imagined we'd be together for 8 years and get serious enough to consider marriage. Unfortunately, that excuse would hold water if the truth had come out within weeks or months, not 8 years. My mom broke down when she talked about the DNA test. She said they panicked when I wanted to take it and didn't know what else to do. My dad's friend who works in the lab apparently helped them submit fake samples, and they've been living with the guilt of that deception ever since. They kept insisting they were trying to protect me, but now they acknowledge their approach caused far more harm than good. My dad said they should have told me the truth about my adoption from the start, and definitely should have spoken up when they realized who Barry was. I responded sarcastically, "You think?" I'm still angry with them, more than angry. Every time they had a chance to tell the truth, they chose not to, and I can't understand how they let me fall in love with Barry knowing all this. My parents also gave me more information about my biological family. My biological father was my adoptive dad's second cousin, Michael, and my biological mother was Lisa. They died in a fire caused by faulty wiring when I was 3 months old. Apparently, Lisa and Barry's Aunt Sarah were very close sisters, which explains why Barry and I have some similar mannerisms and tastes that we always attributed to spending so much time together. I have other biological relatives I've never met, including grandparents who are still alive. My parents said Michael's family knows about me and has always been curious about how I was doing, but respected my adoptive parents' wish to keep my adoption private. Now that the truth is out, my biological grandparents would like to meet me if I'm open to it. This is another overwhelming aspect of the situation. I went from thinking I had a small family to learning I have an entire other family I've never known. I don't know how to process the idea of meeting these people or what kind of relationship I'd want with them. I've also been thinking a lot about Barry's Aunt Sarah and her role in all this. I feel like she could have done something to prevent this situation too. Barry has talked to her several times since everything came to light, and apparently she's been carrying a lot of guilt for not speaking up sooner. The practical aspects of my life are still a mess. Barry and I have to sort out our housing situation, our shared finances, and all the other logistics we've built together over the years. Even if we decide to stay together, we'll probably need to take a step back and rebuild our relationship with this new information. If we decide to break up, untangling our lives will be incredibly complicated and painful. I've been seeing a therapist to help me process everything, which has been helpful. She's been working with me to separate my feelings about the deception from my feelings for Barry, and to help me think about what I really want for my future instead of just reacting to the shock of recent events. I've also been researching cousin relationships more, though just typing it feels weird. All I can find is information from people who are with their cousins but knew from the start who they were. In our case, it's different because we didn't know until now. The fact that Barry and I are cousins is something we'll have to live with, whether we stay together or not. Because even if we decide not to continue our relationship, we'll still have had one for 8 years. I plan to meet my biological grandparents next week. Barry is coming with me for emotional support, which feels right, even though our own relationship is still uncertain. We've been each other's main support system for 8 years, and that doesn't have to change right away just because we found out we're related. I still don't know what I want for the future, but I'm starting to feel like maybe I don't have to make all these decisions immediately. I can take time to process everything and figure out what feels right for me instead of rushing into major changes because of the shock of the truth. Update 2. I'm writing this update from my biological grandparents' house, where I've learned new things about the family. Meeting my biological family has been incredible and overwhelming, but it's also revealed information that changes everything I thought I knew. Barry came with me to meet my biological grandparents, Helen and Robert, last Tuesday. The meeting was emotional and beautiful. They live about 2 hours from our city in a small town I'd never been to. When we arrived at their house, Helen was waiting on the porch and started crying as soon as she saw me. The resemblance between us was obvious right away. I have Helen's nose and Robert's eyes, and I move my hands the same way Helen does when I talk. It was surreal to see these genetic traits I'd never understood before because I didn't know where they came from. Helen and Robert welcomed both Barry and me warmly. They've been hoping to meet me for years, but respected my adoptive parents wished to keep my adoption private. They showed me photo albums full of pictures of my biological parents, and I finally got to see where I come from. My biological father, Michael, looked almost exactly like the family on my adoptive dad's side, which explains why my adoptive parents' story about my features coming from that side seemed plausible. But here's where things get complicated in a way I never expected. While we were looking at family photos and talking about family history, Helen casually mentioned something that made my stomach drop. She said she was so glad Barry and I had found each other because Lisa, my biological mother, had always hoped her children would stay connected to Sarah's family. When I asked what she meant by children, Helen looked confused. And that's when I learned I have a biological sister named Emma, who is 2 years older than me. Emma was at her dad's sister's house the night of the fire, so she survived when our parents didn't. Barry and I just looked at each other when Helen told us this. Emma was raised by our biological father's sister and her husband in another state. Helen said Emma knows about me and has always wanted to meet me, but like everyone else, she respected my adoptive parents' decision to keep my adoption private. This revelation completely changes my understanding of my biological family. And it also adds another layer of complexity to my relationship with Barry. I have a sister I've never met. She's lived her whole life knowing she has a sister who was raised separately. Helen gave me Emma's contact information, and I called her that same afternoon from Helen and Robert's guest room. The conversation was incredible and emotional. Emma said she's thought about me every day for 26 years and has always hoped we could connect someday. She's married and has 2 young kids. Emma also told me something that left me completely shocked. She said our biological parents, Michael and Lisa, weren't actually first cousins like my adoptive parents told me. Michael and my adoptive father were second cousins, which makes Barry and me second cousins, not first cousins. When I confronted my adoptive parents over the phone about this, they admitted they were confused about the exact family relationships and had assumed Barry and I were more closely related than we actually are. They said they knew Michael was some kind of cousin, but didn't understand the distinction between first and second cousins. Second cousins share great-grandparents instead of grandparents, which means the genetic connection between Barry and me is much more distant than I thought. It doesn't solve everything, but it's a little less bad than before. The risk of genetic issues in children is barely higher than for unrelated couples, and second cousin relationships are legal everywhere in the United States. In fact, most people don't even consider second cousins close relatives. This information has completely changed how I feel about my relationship with Barry. It's still a family connection, but not as significant as before. Barry and I had a long conversation about this new information, and we both feel it changes things a bit. We still need to work through the emotional impact of learning about our biological connection and dealing with all the deception from our families, but at least it's not as bad as it initially seemed. We're going to keep living separately a little longer while we work through everything with our therapists. Then we'll make a calm decision about all this. I'm also incredibly excited to connect with Emma and learn more about my biological family. Emma plans to visit us next month with her family, and I can't wait to meet my nephews and spend time with the sister I never knew I had. Helen and Robert have been amazing. They've told me so much about my biological parents and shared stories that help me understand where some of my personality traits and interests come from. It's been healing to learn about my genetic heritage and finally have answers to questions I didn't even know I had. I still don't know what to think about my adoptive parents. I'm still angry with them. But in the big picture of everything going on, I haven't even thought about them much. I mean, I have too much on my mind now meeting my grandparents, sister, nephews, and with all this new information. An unexpected positive outcome of all this is that Barry has also connected more deeply with his biological family history. Through my grandparents, he's learned more about his mother's side of the family and been able to see photos and hear stories about relatives he never knew. I feel like my life has completely changed in the last few weeks, but not all of it has been negative from discovering all this. Yes, finding out about the deception was traumatic, and yes, having to question my relationship with Barry was incredibly difficult, but I've also gained a sister, grandparents, and a much clearer understanding of my origins. I planned to defer grad school for a year as I was considering, but now it's not because I'm overwhelmed by a crisis. Instead, I want to take time to travel and visit Emma, build relationships with my biological family, and figure out how my relationship with Barry will proceed on this new foundation. Update 3. Emma came to visit me earlier than planned. She was supposed to come next month, but she said she couldn't wait any longer to meet me. So she flew in with her 2 kids for a long weekend. The moment I saw her at the airport, I started crying. We look so much alike that several people asked if we were twins. Spending time with Emma has been incredible. We have so many similar mannerisms and interests that clearly come from our shared genetics. We both unconsciously organize things the same way. We both get excited about the same types of movies. And we even discovered we both have the same weird habit of eating the same thing for dinner when we're stressed. Emma brought photo albums and home videos that our biological father's sister had kept over the years. Watching videos of our parents together was emotional and healing. I finally got to see what they were like as people, not just the tragic story of how they died. Barry, and I finally had a proper talk about us. He mentioned what we'd both been thinking but hadn't said out loud. He told me he'd been carrying the engagement ring with him for the past few weeks, but every time he thought about proposing again, something didn't feel right anymore. I felt relieved when he said it, because I felt the same way. Even though the logical part of my brain understood that second cousins getting married isn't that bad, emotionally I couldn't get past how weird it all felt. Knowing we shared great-grandparents and seeing the family resemblances when I met Helen and Robert, meeting Emma, and realizing we're all part of this connected family tree, made our romantic relationship feel strange in a way I couldn't shake. We had one of the hardest conversations of our relationship. We both admitted that, while we still love each other deeply, something fundamental changed when we learned the truth about our biological connection. It wasn't about legality or even social acceptance. It was about how we felt about ourselves as a couple. Barry said something that summed it up perfectly. He said that every time he looks at me now, part of his brain sees me first as family and then as his girlfriend, and that feels weird to him. I told him I was experiencing the same thing, especially after meeting my biological grandparents and seeing how much I look like them. We talked for hours about whether those feelings might fade over time, but we both realized we didn't want to spend months or years trying to get past something that might always feel uncomfortable for us. 8 years is a long time to be with someone, and ending our romantic relationship was one of the hardest decisions either of us has ever made. But it felt like the right one. Looking back on everything that's happened in the last few months, I'm still processing it. I went from thinking I was about to get engaged to the love of my life to discovering my entire identity was based on lies, to learning I had a whole biological family I'd never known, to finally realizing that some truths change everything even when they technically shouldn't matter. The situation was traumatic and difficult, and I can't say I'm grateful for how it all unfolded because losing Barry as a partner has been incredibly painful. The whole experience taught me that sometimes there's no clearly right or wrong answer. You just have to trust your instincts about what you can live with. I've lost a relationship and parents, but I've gained an entire new family and a friend/cousin. Sometimes life throws you situations that don't have clean, happy endings. Barry and I both lost something important when we decided not to get married, but we also chose authenticity and emotional honesty over trying to force something that no longer felt right. I have to believe it was the right choice, even when it doesn't feel good. I'm sorry to disappoint the people in the comments who were rooting for my relationship. When something doesn't feel right, it's better to step aside. I think it was the most mature decision we've made. We'll stay in touch as friends, mostly because we're both discovering the family we have, but that will be the extent of our relationship. We might need to keep some distance for a while, but we're both on the same page that this is best for everyone. The good thing about ending a relationship on good terms is that all the logistics can be handled without ugly moments. Now let's talk about my adoptive parents. I've had my moment of calm in this whole mess to think about what to do with them. If they had told me I was adopted, and that Barry was my cousin at the start of the relationship, even after a few weeks, this situation would be very different. I'm not angry with them for me being adopted, as some people suggested. It's the lying. I understand they might have been afraid to tell me I was adopted in case it made me love them less. The reality is it wouldn't have changed anything. What changes everything in our relationship is letting me have a relationship with Barry all this time. And the DNA test part is too big to let slide. That's why Barry and I are pursuing a lawsuit for damages. Because if I'd found out with the test what was going on, this could have been avoided enormously. It would have been a few years of relationship versus 8 now. We're also filing a lawsuit against the lab and against my adoptive dad's friend who helped perpetrate this. I'm sorry if the pro-adoptive parents team gets upset about this, but it's too big. They did the right thing before we got married and had kids, but in the meantime, they let us do many other things without saying anything. They even liked it. And while it turned out to be only my second cousin, they didn't know that, which I have proof of in messages. Luckily, that team is pretty small, and I know everyone was against the idea of continuing a relationship like that with Barry despite the latest developments. Update 4. The consequences of our lawsuit, I suppose, will be the end of my story. Because as far as my whole story goes, I don't think there's much more to tell. We won the lawsuit against my parents, and as compensation, we received almost $45,000 between the two of us, Barry and me, plus an undisclosed sum that's a bit higher from the lab that analyzed my tests and returned altered results, and about $30,000 from the lawsuit against my adoptive father's friend who helped him do all this. It's a very high amount each of us received. And for my part, I plan to use it to pay for my grad school and save the rest. Likewise, Barry plans to put that money to good use. At least we didn't have a wedding planned, and neither of us lost a large sum on preparations. Another consequence is that my adoptive father's friend was fired, and the company has sued him. But I can't give more details about that since it's not something I'm closely involved in. My relationship with my adoptive parents is completely broken. My decision was to cut them out of my life after what happened, but after the lawsuit, our bond is beyond repair. That also extends to the rest of the family who saw and supported this the whole time. The ones that aren't are my bonds with my grandparents, my sister, and her family. We've been catching up on lost time, and I love it. Barry and I remain friends. We talk from time to time, but neither of us seems to regret the decision we made. We share that friendship bond we formed over 8 years, but the romantic part seems to have faded with time. It feels crazy that more than a year has passed since we made this decision, so it feels so distant now.